I'm joined today by Jeremy Skillington, CEO of Poolbeg Pharma. Thanks for joining me, Jeremy.
Great to be here, Darren.
So, Jeremy, can you tell us who are Poolbeg and what does the company do?
Yeah, Poolbeg, we're a clinical stage biotech company. We're listed in London on the AIM market under POLB. We have a couple of key programs that we're working on right now. The first of which is a small molecule drug to prevent cytokine release syndrome that's associated with cancer immunotherapies. And it's a very exciting area to be in. It's, there's a large unmet medical need here. We've done a lot of work kind of on the clinical program to get us to this point. We have got MHRA approval to run a clinical trial. So it's actually very soon we'll be starting our clinical trial in that space. And it's been led by Dr. Emma Searle up in the Christie in Manchester. We've got 5 other sites around the UK that's participating in this trial. The patients will be relapsed refractory multiple myeloma patients. So in the hematology space, we're partnered with Johnson & Johnson on this particular trial. They're giving us their drug teclistamab that the patients will be receiving. But vast majority of patients will develop cytokine release syndrome, which is where your immune system is overactive or overreacting. And our goal, our ambition is to prevent that from happening in the first place. And there's multiple benefits, for that to happen, not just for patient health, but the healthcare system as well. It'll take a bit of pressure off the healthcare system, and there's a lot of interest in this area. And I think that we've got a very exciting program here to move forward. As I say, we're going to expect to have clinical data later this summer, so it's pretty rapid clinical trials. So looking forward to that.
And this CRS, I'm going to call it CRS because I can't remember what the name was. It seems a bit of a mouthful. But this is something that when cancer patients are treated, they need like intensive care, don't they? And so this drug POLB is basically a drug that can, or hopefully can essentially take away those serious side effects so that people can actually have that treatment and not succumb to the CRS. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. The biotech industry has made a lot of progress in these blood cancers and these kind of hematological cancers. Multiple myeloma is a very good example. And what they've done more recently is, moved a long way away from the blunt force, trauma that is chemotherapy. And these newer therapeutics are getting very sophisticated. So what they're doing is they're taking your own immune system and getting your immune system to go after the tumor. So it's a very clever approach. And the efficacy of these drugs is terrific. There are actual functional cures. The patients are living kind of a long time and dying of other diseases. But in the vast majority of patients who receive these drugs, there is that side effect of cytokine release syndrome, cytokine storm, and it's challenging because of CRS. A lot of these patients have to leave their hometown and go to London, for example, to get these therapies, because the risk of CRS, you have to be in a dedicated cancer clinic who have the capabilities to manage the CRS. Now, when that happens, there's interventions. They're able to kind of try and keep the immune system down, bring it back under control. But our goal ultimately is to prevent it from happening in the first place. And there's multiple advantages to this, but key of which, and I think you were alluding to it, is like the patient can actually stay in their hometown and get their cancer drugs there, because again the CRS will be managed. So we've gotten a lot of interest, a lot of excitement from our colleagues in the industry, because if it works in this particular trial, as I said, this topical trial we're calling it, that we're just about to start, then we have broad ranging applications for other cancer immunotherapies as well, where CRS is also an issue.
Right. So what I'm trying to get my head around here is the scale of this. So like if this drug's successful through the trials, does it suddenly mean that there's a heck of a lot more cancer treatment that could be given that isn't, which means there's a scale in terms of how many people can be treated?
Yeah, I think there's a good way to look at this, and that's, as I mentioned, a lot of these people. I kind of give you examples. If somebody in kind of rural Norfolk is diagnosed with multiple myeloma, they'll have to come to London, and there's a lot of disruption to life, right? It's one thing about being diagnosed, but having to leave home, having to go up to the city, family comes with you. You got to be there for a week or 2 or 3 to kind of manage this. So our goal ultimately is if we can prevent the cytokine release syndrome, the CRS, from happening, they can stay close to home, they can go to their local hospital, they can get their treatments there, and then go home. So it's kind of, say, it takes the pressure off the healthcare system, but it just makes life more convenient. And I think that we've talked to a lot of key opinion leaders, like clinicians who are actively, seeing patients on a daily basis. They really like the concept of this to preventing CRS. But as a biotech company, we were also keen to understand, what's the market forces, what is the marketplace out there. So we recently did an independent analysis where we talked to some insurance providers in the US about this drug, and they were like, absolutely, if you can keep patients out of hospital, that is, obviously great for the patients, but great for these insurance companies as well. So they're saying absolutely there's a market here. There's a price point. They're willing to pay for a drug like POLB 001 to prevent CRS. And the interesting thing with cancer immunotherapies, there's a whole host of drugs out there. There are CAR T cell therapies, bispecific antibodies, trispecific antibodies, and each one of those there's a CRS issue. So we feel that our drug can be complementing those. So it's kind of supportive care. It can be used in combination with these really important cancer immunotherapies drugs. But as I say, reducing or eliminating the CRS, that's our ultimate goal.
So the market opportunity then, like you say, is potentially significant.
Huge, absolutely huge.
Yeah.
And I will say there's nothing else has been approved to prevent CRS associated with cancer immunotherapies. So we did as I say, an in-depth analysis, talked to key opinion leaders, talked to insurance companies, talked to providers. And what we're seeing, we did an analysis where we looked at just 2 tumor types. So we looked at multiple myeloma, and we looked at another disease, diffuse large B-cell lymphoma. And they're typically given the CAR T cell therapies and bispecifics. And if you look at the kind of market analysis of that, you roughly got about 500,000 patients will be diagnosed with those 2 diseases in the United States and the EU5, as it's called, the large European markets. So you got 500,000 patients between 2023 and 2030. So it's a big patient population, and each of these is eligible for these cancer immunotherapies. So of course, each of these then will be eligible for POLB 001. So it's a large population, and again, looking at the market size, potentially about a $10 billion market opportunity here. And when we talked to US payers, they were like, absolutely, we're willing to pay for a drug like this to kind of reduce or eliminate CRS. Yeah. So again, we're very kind of happy with the outputs, let's say, from that independent analysis of the market opportunity. And as I say, we're pushing forward now to get key data from our clinical trial that's upcoming, and ultimately partnering with another pharma or biotech company to take it further into the clinic and onto the market.
And that trial, which you've obviously now got approval for, I saw in the RNS, this involves some big name hospitals, doesn't it? I think it's like the Royal Marsden and other cancer hospitals.
Yeah, we always tell people when trials are about to start, when you dose the first patient, you're 90% of the way there. There's a lot of work in the background that kind of goes on about getting the trials sites kind of up and running and initiated, and getting drugs on site and getting approval, as you say, from the MHRA to run this trial. And the MHRA, they look at all of the data we've generated thus far, and that's kind of preclinical data. It'll be clinical data that we have. The drug itself is kind of safe. It is effective or efficacious when it comes to inhibiting our target. So there's a sure, off you go. So we're looking, like the lead investigator I mentioned, Dr. Emma Searle. She's in the Christie in Manchester, but you're right. We've got the Royal Marsden, we've got the University Hospitals in Birmingham, we've got the Royal Stoke University Hospital, we've got Hospital NHS Lothian up in Edinburgh, and then University College London hospitals as well. So fantastic sites that see a lot of these multiple myeloma patients. So our goal or our ambition is to kind of start this trial. It runs very quickly because we're just looking at that initial immune response, inflammatory response to when the patients receive the drug, the cancer immunotherapy. So we'll have data from each individual patient within about a month when they started the trial. So we're very kind of, let's say, ambitious or aggressive to kind of push this forward as quickly as possible, so that we will have that key clinical data by this summer, sometime this summer. And then, as I say, that's enough to trigger our partnering discussions. And we've lined up a lot of different pharma and biotech companies who are interested in our program. And I think the key catalyst then is the data that comes from this trial. So yeah, it's a very exciting time for the company, without question.
And a quick word on protecting your IP. I think you've put out a couple of RNSs about patents. I think one was in Australia. Obviously, this could be a global product. How do you, are you going to be? Are you applying for more patents to protect the IP?
Yeah, without question. I mean, I've always said that in this industry, to move forward, two key components, are data, obviously positive and compelling data, and then number two is intellectual property. You cannot move forward without intellectual property. So back in 2024, when we, had the genesis, the idea about using POLB 001 for preventing CRS and cancer immunotherapy, we filed patents broadly, globally, the US and in Europe and China, etc., like broad global to get broad coverage. And the Australians, I guess you could say, were kind of first past the post. They kind of reviewed all of the information. They look at other patents that are out there. Is this novel? Is this inventive? Is there prior art? So to do all this analysis. So in Australia, they were like, we got a clean slate, as it were. So we got our first grant there. But there's others are coming through, as you say. It's kind of a global opportunity here. So we're hoping to be able to announce in the next, several months or so that there's additional patents are being granted. So it's really important to kind of protect the approach that we have here. And as I say, that's important from our partnering discussions as well, because you don't invest heavily in a program without having that kind of necessary protection. Now, I will add one other point, is that last year the US FDA gave us orphan drug designation, and this is important as well. It gives you 7 years of market exclusivity, almost independent of your intellectual property position. So it's an additional layer of protection. So 7 years, of kind of a clear field, to market a product on launch or on approval. So that's again attractive for the partners that we're speaking with.
Okay. You've got, I think, a couple of other products in development as well. I'm not sure if the influenza one is connected to POLB 001, because you said about it having potential other applications, but I think you have like something influenza-based, you have GLP-1. What sort of stages are those at?
Yeah, the influenza is an interesting one because when we started as a company, we spun out of hVivo, who ran human viral challenge studies. So our initial idea was around severe influenza. Now, these are patients who already have the disease, and you're looking to kind of help them recover quicker. And POLB 001 was our lead candidate in that as well. And again, it's all linked to this kind of cytokine storm, cytokine release syndrome. In the one case, it's triggered by the cancer immunotherapy drug. On the other hand, it's triggered by the influenza virus. So it's kind of similar pathways, similar mechanisms. But the cancer immunotherapy is a much larger market, so we have we're pushing harder, quicker on the cancer immunotherapy space. But yes, I mean, as an additional indication, severe influenza could be a potential, and we do have patents in that space as well. Actually, granted patents, globally granted patents for the use of POLB 001 and other P38 MAP kinase inhibitors to treat severe influenza. So that's kind of in as I say, sitting in the background, focusing on the cancer immunotherapy, as I said. And then you're right, the oral GLP-1, again, there was $20 billion worth of deals were done last year in the GLP-1 of the obesity space. So we are partnering with a group, Anabio, that have a very clever technology where they can encapsulate the GLP-1 peptide. And when you can do that, you can actually ingest it then. It's protected from the stomach acids and enzymes, the low pH there. And then as it progresses, into the small intestine, it essentially, you could say, kind of dissolves, releasing the GLP-1, and that's kind of a site of action. So we've got a very interesting, very exciting clinical trial in the planning there. We're doing, going around kind of manufacturing now and validation, submitting our, compiling our documents for the MHRA to get approval to run a clinical trial for the second half of this year. And this trial will be run by Professor Carella Rue, who's globally recognized in the metabolic disease space. And again, similar but very different to 001, we're going to have data very, very quickly here. This is essentially looking to see if the drug is on board and does it have an effect on what's essentially glucose tolerance. So it's the use of the GLP-1, as I say, the action of the peptide itself. So a very quick clinical trial. And if that's positive, if we're seeing that the drug is safe and effective in these healthy volunteers, we've already been approached by other companies, potential collaborations to take that forward. So as I say, we're very much in partnering mode for both programs. But once we have the data in hand, that really is the catalyst to drive those discussions forward.
Okay. And in terms of like existing partnerships with, say, other biotech companies and, using AI, I think there's been mention of on your website, you've got a program there. Well, what are you doing in that space, or who are you partnering with, or who are you talking to?
It's a good question. The AI partnership was really fascinating, really interesting. We had this terrific data set that we inherited, you could say, from hVivo, and it was in the human viral challenge space where we had volunteers who received the influenza virus. We had a lot of data where we were able to kind of track the course of disease, what genes are upregulated or downregulated. But it's a huge data set. It was like 100 and something patients who had influenza, something you couldn't do in the lab or you couldn't do in the office to analyze this. We also had data sets in RSV, respiratory syncytial virus, large data sets. So we collaborated with groups Cytokine, who have existing collaborations with the likes of Pfizer and other big pharma companies, but they have this kind of AI platform where they can take this huge data set and essentially kind of analyze it, look for trends, look for, what genes are related to that disease progression or, disease, as I say, kind of survival, in one sense, but looking at kind of what genes are being controlled. And ultimately, we did come up with some very interesting drug targets and even repositioning drugs, all using AI. And it was kind of a fascinating collaboration. And we've been talking to other, and again, this is something we want to partner out immediately. So we've been talking to other, pharma biotech companies in the, infectious disease space to take these novel targets forward. But it was just a very good, very clever use of AI. And as I say, taking these large data sets and drilling down or distilling down to understand from a biology standpoint what's happening as the disease progresses and what genes are, in particular, what genes are critical for the progression. So it was very, very interesting. But again, I go back, this is an industry where it's all about collaborations. We've got a collaborator around who's going to run our clinical trial, where Johnson & Johnson have given us their approved cancer immunotherapy that we're going to put into our clinical trial to try and reduce CRS there. But ultimately, the ultimate goal of the company is to take it forward further into the clinic. We will need a partner to take that forward as well. And we've talked about the deal structures there are kind of fluid and flexible, but there'll be an upfront payment, which would be kind of as you can say, that'll be our kind of revenue stream when it comes to the second half of this year, partnering the program and then taking it forward. And that may be, with a partner, or the partner may take it forward themselves, and that's all down to negotiation. So a fantastic time for the company. We've really worked hard to put ourselves in the shop window, as it were. And when it comes to having positive data for this upcoming topical trial, I think that really is that key catalyst that will progress forward then and get a very attractive deal for the company.
Right, it sounds like Poolbeg are in the mix with some big names already. But okay, so look, investing in biotech from an investor's point of view, it's it's high risk, or it should be considered high risk. But of course, obviously the rewards can be phenomenal as well. Can you tell us what the key value inflection points coming up might be? I think we know one of them, which is the upcoming trial. And perhaps just why investors should be looking at Poolbeg now, because it seems like you are literally driving through the roadmap and you're coming up to some critical milestones now.
Yeah, I think the timing is optimal, for investors. I do think we've taken, through a lot of hard work and good decision making, we've de-risked the program significantly, and that's on the back of data we've already generated to date. I think we have the right drug in the right indication. The timing is optimal as well, as that there's nothing else approved for CRS. And I think that our interest is confirmed, as I say, from Johnson & Johnson. They don't provide drug to just anybody. They have to go through some validation, and they've reviewed all of our data and are kind of see the approach we're taking. To them, they're very keen because this is an oral drug. The patients can take this from home, before they come into hospital. So it kind of keeps the immune system calm and under control. So you're right about these kind of clinical milestones. In the very near future, we'll have a good insight into the efficacy of this drug, safety as well, of course. But these are importantly in patients, in multiple myeloma patients, relapsed refractory multiple myeloma patients. So these are kind of a key cohort, a key group, and if the data is positive there, then as I say, there'll be a rapid transaction that will follow, which should and would drive the valuation of the company. So again, we've worked hard to kind of de-risk the program. I do take your point about it's a risky industry. Obviously, it's a risky industry from the start. Where if you've got a target and you need to validate that target, or you need to get a drug, you need to validate that drug. I think we're further down the line.
I'd say it's worth pointing out there's been some significant de-risking done to that.
Oh, absolutely, without question. Yeah, we already have clinical data that kind of confirms that the drug is safe and effective in suppressing that inflammatory response.
Right.
So that gives us great confidence that we're kind of moving in the right direction. But as I say, and then we're putting this into essentially upwards of 30 patients. So the trial itself is designed to be open label. So we'll have kind of that immediate insight into the trial itself, the patients, the data. So we'll get a very early read on the kind of levels of success. And the teclistamab, the drug that we're using from Johnson & Johnson, 72% of patients develop CRS. So which essentially, let's say, for the sake of argument, 2 in 3. So, we'll be able to see very quickly, if that's reduced to 1 in 3 or 0 in 3 or 1 in 6 or 1 in 9, so we'll be able to get a good readout. And we're looking at that, molecularly too, we're looking at that kind of cytokine response. So we will have very clear, insights into the efficacy around this drug, as I say, but later in the summer is the plan, and then can continue from there. We've got 6 trial sites, so we're hoping enrollment will be pretty rapid. We're looking at an additional 2 just to accelerate as I say, getting to those data points. And so I say, fantastic, and very exciting to have at a company, and it just goes to show us one of those where the hard work is now paying off. The team has been terrific to kind of line ourselves up. Getting the MHRA approval was an important milestone. We have the J&J drug and our own drug kind of ready, kind of to shipping to sites, and we've got upcoming kind of site initiation visits or schedules. Just all those tiny little steps are all in place, and it's just getting enrollment and getting data, and that's the next push that'll be on.
Excellent. Well, look, thanks for joining me, Jeremy. It sounds like it's a high impact H2 coming up for Poolbeg. Please come back and chat to us soon.
Hopefully with good news.
Yes.